Добрый день, друзья! Наше ядро нашей группы в сборе, так что мы можем начать знакомиться с тем, что ждет нас в последние дни этого мира. Last time we started reading the eschatological discourse of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. Am I correct in remembering, Joel, that you wanted to say some words about the eschatological discourse as such? No?
Uh, yes. I think the only thing I wanted to mention that we didn't talk about last time is uh, its placement in Mark. And if you could go to the end of chapter 13, I just wanted to say
Okay.
something the yeah, um, just about these last three verses. Um, he keeps saying, keep awake or wake up, Gregorete, verse 35, repeated in verse 37. Um, and I think this points to a sort of double entendre here that, on the one hand, and most obviously, uh, he is talking about the eschaton proper as we would normally think about it, the end of everything, Jesus coming back on the clouds, the disintegration of the universe, and then a new universe being born. And so that's what chapter 13 has talked about in general. But in the context of Mark, I think it's also important that this leads immediately into the passion narrative. So I think that's a double entendre, keep awake for the signs of the end, but also to the reader of Mark, stay awake now, because there is a sense in which this end that we're talking about has already happened in the death and resurrection of Jesus. Which, is immediately, the narrative of which is immediately going to start right after this. Right after verses 35 to 37, you have 14:1 about the Jesus enemies gathering together and making this conspiracy to kill him. So I think it's something similar to what happens uh, at the end of chapter 8, where also you have a series of eschatological prophecies, and then at the beginning of 9, this saying about uh, there are some standing here who won't taste death until they see the kingdom come in power. You know, most literally, that's probably about the end of everything, the eschaton as we normally think of it. But it also immediately leads into the narrative of the transfiguration, which points to the resurrection of Jesus. So I think that, there is a, in both of those transitions, there's implied the already and the not yet aspect of Christian eschatology. So I think that's what I wanted to say.
What you're talking about is a kind of realized eschatology, which is often ascribed to later gospel writers, but not so often to Mark, as
Yeah, that's right. And I think it is more pronounced in the Gospel of John, especially, where the eschaton seems to almost evaporate, except for a few little references to a future hope, into the story of the of Jesus' life on earth and death and resurrection. But I think it's already, at least this is the way I read Mark, that there is a sense of realized eschatology, but also a futuristic eschatology. He hasn't given up on the future hope, but he also wants to say that the eschaton has started to come in the death and resurrection of Jesus.
okay.
Does it make sense to you?
Uh,
Am I too much
we
in?
are now in the very beginning of the eschatological discourse of Jesus in chapter 13. So we'll have the opportunity to read chapter 13, keeping in mind the perspective that you just suggested, and testing it against the material that we'll read and analyze.
Yeah, we were going so fast last time. I thought maybe we had done with chapter 13, but it's
No,
fine with
no,
me. No, okay,
no,
good.
no.
All right.
Chapter 13 is long and important, and the more we look into the events that surround us, the more important it seems.
True. Unfortunately true.
So let's start. Лариса, вы наша традиционная греческая чтица.
Да. Verse 11, yeah?
Да, absolutely.
Kai gotan agosin humas paradidontes me promerimnate tilaleste al go ean dotegumin enekeine tegora tutolaleite. Ugar este humeis voilaluntes alatopneuma tohagion. Kai paradosi adelphos adelphon eistanaton, kai pater teknon, kai επαναστέσονται έκνα επιβονείς, kai θανατόδουσιν αυτούς. Kai έσαστε μισούμενοι υπό πάντων δια το όνομά μου. Γούδε υπομείνας εις τέλος βούτος σωτέσιтай. Дальше еще читать.
Давайте пока на некоторых остановимся. А когда вас поведут на суд, не знаю, может быть, конечно, достаточно вольная передача греческого «Кайотан агусин юмас парадидантес», когда предающие вас поведут. Здесь важный смысл, конечно же, есть в ключевом для Марка глаголе «парадидумай». Да? У нас постоянно вехи, по которым движется нарратив Марка, отмечаются тем, что происходит действие, которое не знаю, как по-русски передать. потому что у нас Иоанн Креститель, он парадидотай. Вот, Иисус парадидотай. Ученики Иисуса, они парадидонтай. Вот. Но как бы переводить это русским словом предавать не совсем местно, что, может быть, за всеми этими действиями, в конечном счете, их инициатором, в качестве их инициатора стоит Бог. Я не знаю, как это выразить. Понимаете, какая у нас есть здесь перекличка с другими ключевыми местами у Марка. Вот можно сейчас открыть нашу Bible.works. Сейчас, секундочку. Мы увидим, какое ключевое значение играет этот термин для Марка. Нет, сейчас не появился наш Bible.works на экране?
Нет.
Наверное, он так не работает. А вот сейчас, я думаю, появился. Метода парада теной он Иоанну. После того, как предан был Иоанн, первая глава, завязка всего. Предсказаниях Иисуса. Парадидотай эсхейрос. Парадотесатай, то есть архиерейси. И здесь перед нами словно бы следующее, третье действие. The third act. The first act was that Ioannes paradidotai, and the second act that Jesus paradidotai, and here we are speaking about Jesus' disciples and followers.
Well, and somebody has said that First John proclaims, preaches, and is handed over, and Jesus preaches, kerusein, and is handed over, and then finally the disciples preach and are handed over. And so I think Mark is implying a continuity in what some might call the history of salvation, in not only in the use of didomi, but also kerusein of all three of those figures: John the Baptist, Jesus, and the disciples.
Yes, but as concerns the verb kerusso, we do not have any problems, any significant problems with rendering it into Russian or English or any other modern language. As concerns paradidostai here, we have problems because, at least in Russian, the most natural verbal equivalent would have meaning to betray. And if the ultimate authority behind what is going on is God, this is not probably what Mark meant.
Well, yeah, though the same verb is used in Isaiah 53, isn't it? You know, he was handed over to suffering and death. And there, I think you have a similar question and maybe a similar double entendre, that this figure, immediately he's handed over to death by human beings, but behind the human being's action, wouldn't one say that the action of God is ultimately responsible?
Yes, and here in 53:6, the idea is in Greek text said quite explicitly, Kyrios paredokon auton. The Lord handed him over.
Yep.
In the Hebrew text, the meaning of the passages here is different. But probably this concerns the meaning of paradidomi in Mark. It may go back to the Septuagint of Isaiah 53.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, so I guess it does raise the question in Mark, is it, are we just talking about the action of human beings, or does the author presume the reader's familiarity with this passage in the Septuagint? I don't know.
But this passage was clearly quite important for the early Christians. Remember, in Acts, there is a discussion between the Ethiopian eunuch and one of the apostles about the servant of the Lord. So I think it's quite probable that at least this passage should have been known and memorized by the early Christians.
Yeah, I think, I'm looking at, I wrote a book about Mark's use of the Old Testament, and I have a couple of paragraphs on this. And I guess I know one of the things I note is that in the Passion predictions in Mark, some of the language is similar to that in the Isaiah suffering servant passages, not only in chapter 3, but also in chapter 50, where the figure is spat on and he's whipped.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yes. In Isaiah 53:12, like in Mark, we have passive voice, so that
Right.
the agent is not mentioned explicitly. But in 53:6, the agent in the Greek text is stated quite explicitly, Kyrios paredokon. This is the theological picture behind different instances of paradidotai.
And it's interesting in the Isaiah passages there, paradothe translates two different verbs, right? In the Hebrew.
Yes,
So,
and frankly speaking, none of the Hebrew words present itself as a natural equivalent to the Greek verb. So it's a good question for those who study Septuagint of Isaiah. Marshall, for example, whether there was a specific idea behind this for the Septuagint translators when they introduced this idea into the translation of Isaiah. But my question...
I think already Jeremias, talks about this, it's sort of a standardizing, or, the fact that the same Greek verb is used for two different Hebrew verbs, Jeremias thought that was pointing to a particular kind of theological conception.
Maybe I'm wrong, we can check, but it doesn't seem that the Greek paradidomi is really a standard equivalent for the Hebrew words that are translated by paradidomi in Isaiah 53. Let's check.
The one word was he'era, right? Which, what does that mean? The Hebrew.
Both verbs are metaphorical. Here I think means something like he was made. It has the connotation with water or liquid being poured out.
Oh, okay.
Yes, of course. You see, the most common translation is Natan. Then also Sagar, Shalome, probably in Yefil. You have that's Aramaic verb, Paga. That's what we have in Isaiah. Also some other including that is said. So the standard equivalent would be Natan or Sagar.
So yeah, it's Sagar in the sense of close up. He has confined him or shut him up. Yeah.
Sagar can also have the meaning close to deliver. What
it's interesting because Paul at the end of Romans 11 says that God has sun ekklesen. He has confined all human beings in disobedience. I wonder if that maybe
it's an interesting connection. Let's look at it closer in a minute. I just want to understand what do we have in Isaiah 47. I cannot understand the meaning. Of this text.
Well, there also it's efga, right? It's paga is being
Yes,
translated.
that's why I looked at this text. Mm, the very difficult translation, but since we're not studying now the Septuagint of Isaiah, probably it may be easier to leave this passage.
I guess it's just a coincidence that it has ervatech, right? With the also with an ayin and a resh, and in the other passage it was ha'ara, but that's probably just a coincidence, right? The same two letters in the Hebrew, ayin and resh.
Yes, but they're in different places. Let's look at Isaiah 53:6. That's where we have Vigia, yes. What other occurrences do we have of Evgia in Isaiah?
There's a lot of hifgia in the Old Testament.
Yes. Yes, it's rather with the rather broad semantics, but not so its translation with the Hebrew paradigm is not so obvious. Meet with kindness, encounter with hostility, fall upon, encounter with request and treat. When you feel cause to light upon, cause one to entreat.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in modern Hebrew, it's almost always negative. But looking at these instances, that's not even maybe usually the case in the Old Testament instances. There's a range.
Yes, but what is important that neither biblical Hebrew meaning of the verb paga in any stem nor modern Hebrew gives any hint at why the Septuagint translators rendered this with paradidomi.
Yeah.
And the earlier the early occurrences in Isaiah, you will find Lamard. Remake, naked, sexual offenses, pour out, guilty for slaying. Neither connotation with being naked, no connotation with pouring a liquid can account for the Greek translation. So it's really a question whether some idea of God delivering a righteous one it's to his enemies was already in the mind of the Greek translator of Isaiah when he thrice in the same chapter translated two different words with the Greek paradidomai without any obvious semantic correspondence. Маша, вы из участников нашей сегодняшней встречи больше всех занимались Септагинта Исаии. Что вы можете сказать по этому поводу?
Давайте немножко позже, я что-то еще не... Мне надо немножко еще подумать.
Хорошо. В общем, так или иначе, но этот глагол у нас представляет собой загадку уже даже в том ветхозаветном тексте, который, скорее всего, здесь и провоцировал появление глагола «парадидумай» у Марка. Но возвращаясь к Марку, даже еще точнее к нашему русскому переводу Марка, на самом деле вопрос, который я поднял, он еще был очень практический. Вот с этой теологией того, что у нас трехэтапным образом Иоанн, Иисус, ученики, они предаются, пассив. И этот, по-видимому, как раз у нас пассив божественного умолчания перед нами. Как нам это по-русски передать?
А нельзя просто передадут вас на суды? Или предадут в суд? Что-нибудь такое? Ну, то есть около буквально. И оставить размышления на читающего. То есть если добавить суды, это уже как бы большая помощь будет.
Русское предадут.
Не, можно передадут. Добавить одну «е» и уже смягчается.
Можно хотя бы отдадут.
В общем, приставку поменять у слова «дать». И все. Сдать, передать.
Сдать?
Сдать можно, да. Сдать в суд. То есть, всё. Раньше в 90-х, мне кажется, было популярно сдавать кого-то.
Ну, в 20-х, я думаю, еще популярнее. Иуда Искариота, который издал его. Да. Но здесь же у нас Бог выступает главным действующим лицом, про что я с самого начала и говорил, и что представляет собой самую главную проблему. Нехорошо говорить про Бога, что он своих последователей предает, еще хуже говорить про него, что он их сдает. Отдает. Может быть, отдает.
Но есть выражение «предать на смерть», например, или «предать суду». Это не совсем предательство. Это именно передача, но звучит как «предать».
Да, вот
Есть еще
предать на
предаться
суд
удовольствием.
плохо.
Что, простите?
Вот как Лариса сказала, предать, как вы сказали, предать суду, да?
Суду, да.
Мне кажется, это неплохо, да, потому что это сохранит вот эту вот интертекстуальность, которую хотелось бы, чтобы она была видна.
It's interesting. It's the same verb that's used in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3, for 15:3, for the handing on of tradition.
Yes.
And there's something similar in Mark chapter 7. For the
But
Pharisees.
sorry, of course, paradosis is the normal way of describing the tradition.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's, and another thing I think I've read or repeated in my commentary was paradidomai, before these New Testament usages, didn't have the nuance of betrayal. It was a more neutral term, just, for, like we see here, to hand something on to somebody else. And it's really from its, well, I guess you would say that this starts with Isaiah 53, its association with the suffering figure in Isaiah 53, and then with Jesus in the Gospels, that gives it this sense of betrayal.
Окей, давайте посмотрим тогда, коль мы говорим про то, что должна быть внутреннее единство в передаче ключевых терминов. Давайте проверим, например, Ларисина предложение по ключевым местам, начиная с Марка 1:14, да? После того, как Иоанн был что?
Нет, мне кажется, мы не говорили, что нужно прям, чтобы везде обязательно это было. Но мне кажется, если мы в каких-то случаях можем сохранить, то это хорошо. Но я далека от идеи, что нужно обязательно везде одним и тем же словом парадигмой передавать. Это невозможно практически.
Это все-таки очень важно. Это явно такой ключевой термин, который просто пронизывает весь сюжет, на нем сюжет строится.
I wonder if the use in Isaiah 53 is an attempt to distance God from, causing suffering to the suffering servant. I mean, especially the contrast between the Hebrew hifgia, which I would think has the nuance of doing damage to him. I wonder if the usage of paradothe instead just distances God somewhat from causing suffering.
Yes, it may be the logic behind the Isaiah translation. Okay, let's go back to our dialogue. Может быть, для того, чтобы хоть как-то сохранить оттенки греческого, скорее здесь глагол «отдать». Это емкость было, сейчас не сказано, тот же самый корень, только с каким-то другим.
Can I just mention one other thing about like verse 10 in the context here? That, I mean, a lot of people have said that verse 10 is something that Mark has introduced into a previous context, because if you look at verse 9, it talks about being handed over to courts and being made to stand witness. And verse 11 continues that thought. When they lead you and they hand you over, don't think about what you're going to say. But verse 10 seems to be disruptive, in saying something that will have to happen first. And it also has some characteristic Markan vocabulary with keruso and evangelion and ethne. So I don't know. I think, trying to see Mark's intervention in his sources is rather speculative, but I think this is one of the stronger cases, just because you have combination of like sort of the internal logic of the narrative being disrupted by verse 10, and then in addition to that, vocabulary, distinctive vocabulary in verse 10, which we see elsewhere pretty prominently in Mark.
But the eschatological discourse as such, doesn't it have some clearly marked three features?
In terms of vocabulary, or in terms of theology, or?
In terms of theology?
Well, yeah, sure. I think that it does correspond to Mark's overall theology, and he does have like an imminent eschatology, so it works overall. But I'm just talking really about the vocabulary and the narrative flow. Verse 9 and verse 11 going very well together, being interrupted by verse 10, by what's talked about in verse 10. It's not the ditch I want to die in, but it's I think it's worth mentioning.
Окей. Но русский глагол «отдать», «предать», «передать», чтобы не было еще, он, как правило, вот, кроме случаев «предать» и назначения «to betray», требует какое-то дальше дополнение, когда вас отдадут, не получится, вас отдадут на суд, да, то не заботьтесь загодя, что говорить. Что будет вам ниспослано в тот час, то и говорите. Не сами будете говорить, но Дух Святой.
Подождите, я не поняла, почему вам не нравится «предадут суду»?
Потому что для других случаев у нас словно бы глагол «отдать», чуть-чуть отдать под стражу, отдать
Окей.
чуть-чуть больше допускает сочетаемость, поэтому, может быть, с ним можно попробовать приблизиться к однообразной передаче этого ключевого выражения.
Ну,
А сама идея, что здесь суд, она берется из следующей половины стиха, да?
она берется из 9 стиха, и тогда теряется, если отдать, то теряется перекличка с 9 стихом.
Что теряется?
Перекличка с 9 стихом, там же тоже
Там как раз было «предавать суду» у нас в переводе.
Окей, хорошо. Вот будут отдавать на суд Синедриона, договорились. Тут, правда, немножко, если следить за подлежащими, парадосусин, это у нас здесь явным образом люди. Вот. А вот это теологическое значение парадидами, это у нас, как мы говорили, скорее всего, Бог за ним стоит, но, может быть, действительно, если вот так попробовать.
Михаил, а в чем проблема, предавать и Бог? Он же может уже руками это все сделать, как бы проблема же какая-то странная, как по мне. То есть я не вижу проблем в том, что кто-то тебя предаст, и это в Божьем плане. То есть в чем проблема?
Но вы не видите, а кто другой может быть видеть. Тогда, может быть, даже не видит проблемы в том, что Бог сдаст кого-то из, скажем, священников, которые будут ему верны. Но вот для кого-то такой способ выражения будет неудачен. Почему я здесь говорю про отдадут? Все исходя из той же, может быть, навязчивой идеи, это греческая парадидотай. Переводить как-то более-менее единообразно. Смотрите, вот с глаголом «отдать» мы можем попробовать все этапы, все 3 акта, о которых речь идет у Марка, описать единообразно. После того, как Иоанн был, вот, тут у нас был отдан под стражу, например.
Ну и под суд все-таки тогда не на суд отдают, а под суд по-русски.
Почему и так отдают же? На суд общественности.
Сейчас. Точно?
Мне кажется, да.
Давайте подумаем.
Вообще, мне кажется, самый лучший русский эквивалент – это слово «арестовать».
Да.
Там же просто парадитами, оно же вообще в причастной, непричастной форме. Может быть, вот это сохранить как как это называется, описание процесса, то есть вас будут вести, предавая. То есть как-то, я не знаю. Для меня просто всю жизнь, предать было нормально в этом стиле.
Сейчас, спасибо. Вот был вопрос насчет отдать под суд или на суд. Вот я открыл русскую классику ровно про ту же самую сцену, о которой мы сейчас говорили, да? «Свинцовой тяжестью всею легли на дворы небеса, искали улик фарисеи, еля перед ним, как лиса, и темными силами храма он отдан подонкам на суд, и с пылкостью той же самой, как славили прежде, клянут». Я думаю, что если Пастернаку не задорно было, не зазорно было писать «отдать на суд», то, может быть, мы тоже можем такое здесь в правлении у нас
Давайте,
сохранить.
отлично, давайте, как у Пастернака, прекрасно. Мне кажется, что будет нормально, если где кто-то будет на суд, а кто-то в тюрьму. Мне кажется, его парадинами вполне нормально это допускает. Действительно, арест, он, так сказать, его последствия могут быть разными.
Хорошо. Но давайте дальше, когда вас отдадут на суд,
А
как-то...
верните нам текст, то у нас
Да.
здесь Bible Box.
Мгм. Как-то мы зависли на этом стихе и на пастернаковских стихах, соответственно. Когда вас отдадут на суд, то не забудьте загодя, что говорить. Что будет вам ниспослано в тот час, то и говорите. Не сами вы будете говорить, но Дух Святой. Брат брата предаст на смерть, отец сына, дети восстанут против родителей, убьют их, все будут ненавидеть вас из-за меня, но кто выстоит до конца, будет спасен. A historical question. What particular period in the history of early Christianity is envisaged here?
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know very much about like handing brother over to death otherwise than from this passage, for example. So, I guess my overall construal of Mark is that the background is the Jewish revolt against Rome. And, this is somewhat speculative, but I guess I argue in my commentary and an article I wrote about the Zitzim Leben of Mark that maybe this refers to persecutions that were associated with the war, about which, however, we don't really have much or any external attestation. We do have attestation that I think maybe Justin mentions, or early Christian sources mentioned, that in the second revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt, Christians were persecuted. But I was retrojecting that onto the first revolt.
Yeah, but as concerns the first revolt, we have a lengthy history by Josephus. Even though Josephus may be a bit biased, but in his history, it seems that much more Jews were killed by their brother Jews during the revolt than by Romans. He speaks about the internal tensions and wars between different factions of the Jewish society, between different parties that instead of making war on Romans, made war on each other. So probably within this context, even though the Christians probably were not as important as other factions and parties that Josephus speaks about, but probably among all this internal fratricide, or fratricide, what would be the correct pronunciation, Joe?
Yeah, fratricidal, yeah.
Fratricide, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and, and we know that in the second revolt, again, why were Christians targeted? Because Bar Kokhba, it was led by somebody who at least some people thought was Messiah. And, Christians couldn't accept that because they already had a Messiah. In the case of the first revolt, there isn't direct evidence, but Josephus does have, descriptions of some of these rebel leaders like entering Jerusalem like a king. And so some, for example, Hengel thought that the first revolt also was probably led by messianic figures. But Josephus has played this down because because Josephus wants to say that Judaism is a very well-behaved religion and that the first revolt, didn't have anything to do with the Jewish religion, and so he wants to eliminate the theological and perhaps messianic dimension of the revolt. So that's all part of this indirect case that I I make in an article I published, I don't know, 40 years ago or so.
But since the second Jewish revolt would be definitely too late for writing Mark, so can we regard these verses as one more argument in favor of dating Mark somewhere in the beginning of the first Jewish revolt, when already the bloodshed started, but the result hasn't yet been evident?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that it seems to me that it reflects the circumstances of the first Jewish revolt, whether the revolt is still ongoing or whether it's already over. And of course, you know, the revolt didn't end in 70. You know, it went on. 70 was the climactic moment with the destruction of the temple, but it went on until about 73. So, yeah, I mean, you might be right, but I'm not sure.
I remember earlier you told us that at some point in your career of Markan scholar, you were pretty confident with regard to the dates of Mark, but then you lost this confidence. And you promised us to remember why did you lose this confidence?
Okay, yeah, I'll go back and study that for next time.
Okay, agreed.
But yeah,
Because
maybe I just got older. Yeah, maybe I just got older and less sure of myself. But I'll go back and I'll try to reconstruct my psychology in the movement from one opinion to another.
Okay, thank you. Because of course the reconstruction of your psychology is also an important topic for scholarly studies.
Yes.
But one of the most important topic for Markan studies is the simple question: when, most probably, was it written?
Yeah, I'll study that for next time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Restudy it. Yeah.
May I have a question?
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure whether it is relevant or not, but my question is about can it be connected with the last verses of Malachi, where it said about the opposite situation, that the new coming of Ilya will be accompanied by peace between children and their fathers. And this verse is a part of what is quoted in the first verses of Mark, and in fuller form it is referred to in Luke, and you can show it. It's Luke 1:17, and he also said that it said that John will prepare the way of the Lord, and also that he will turn hearts of children to their fathers. My idea is just that that what we have in Mark is right the opposite to
right. Yeah.
predicted.
Yeah, that seems right to me. And I guess you could put those things together by saying that in this sort of Jewish apocalyptic mind, you know, the last times will be times of, you know, all sorts of trouble and strife and fighting, including, you know, families being divided. And then the end of Malachi says, but, you know, when the end comes, then these families which have been fighting will be united. So
Yeah, yeah.
that it's a sign of the last times that people are, that families are breaking up, and when the new age comes, then families will be restored.
Yeah, it's for me it's like literary background of this saying about fathers and children.
Yeah, well, and yeah, and this does relate to a passage earlier in Mark where in chapter 9, right after the transfiguration, you know, the disciples say, why do the scribes say that Elijah comes first? And Jesus says, Elijah does come first and restores all things, which is, that seems to echo the Malachi passage you're talking about. But
Which
this is Mark chapter 9, verse wait, I'm on the wrong gospel. Right after the transfiguration.
Mhm.
Yeah, Mark 9, verse 12. Elijah comes first and restores everything, Panta.
Mhm.
But I've argued maybe that should be a question. You know, you think that Elijah comes first and restores all things? You know, and that he's, you know, he's questioning this expectation, but that would seem to refer to like the end of Malachi with this expectation of.
Can you remind us once again what is the verse number?
Chapter 9, verse 12.
Апокатистаний.
Yeah. And is that verb used in at the end of Malachi in the Septuagint?
No, I don't think so. I think there it should be epistrepho, the same as in.
Oh, epistrepho, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess is this. I can check.
But I think that verse is a clear. It's a reference to that Malachi passage.
Yeah, maybe.
I scrolled to our translation of this verse, and as you see, we have followed your exegesis in making this utterance a question.
Yeah.
Илья, придя первым, все восстановит.
Yeah.
Joel, in Luke we have epistrepho, but in Malachi, in the Septuagint, we have apokatastesei. So it's
Okay. So it is the
same,
yeah.
same as in Mark. So you are
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's
well, yeah. So I see the passage in chapter 9 as, you know, Jesus saying, you know, where are we on this eschatological timeline? Is this the time in which Elijah is going to restore everything? Well, if that's true, why does the scripture say that the Son of Man must be handed over? In other words, we're not at the end yet.
yeah.
We're not at the time of restoration yet.
Yeah,
we're at the time of suffering.
Yeah, so
And
maybe my guess is right. Looking on this reference to Malachi, I think it is very likely that there we have another antonymous allusion to the same verse.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, that would be the sort of passage that would, attract the attention of Christians. And others who were interested in the end of the world. And I think in apocalyptic groups, people are often trying to figure out where they are on the eschatological timeline. Are we in the time right before the end? How soon is the end going to come? And I think often the basic answer is when things get really, really, really bad, so bad that they can't get any worse, then the end is about to come. And the sufferings of the present time are about to be reversed. So, I do think that this passage and the similar passages in the New Testament they're partly trying to locate, where the author wants to say, himself and his community are standing. And people have been using them ever since for the same purpose, right?
Тоже. In order for us to try to better understand where in this history Mark or his sources are situated, let's at least start dealing with the next pericope. Verses 14 through 20. I think this is a very united piece of text. We shall not divide it into subparts. So probably let's start analyzing this pericope, and if necessary, we will continue with this pericope next time. But now I ask Larissa, as our Greek reader, to read verses 14 through 20.
Όταν δε είδετε το βδέλυγμα τες ερεμόσεως, εστεκότα γούπα ουδέη, γο αναγινώσκον νοήτο, τότε γοι εν τε Ιουδαία φευγέτωσαν είστα όρεν. Γode επί του δώματος με καταβάτω, με δε εσελτάτω, αράει τι εκτές οικίας αυτού. Καίγω εις τον αγρόν με επιστρέψατο εις τα οπίσω, άράει το γημάτιον αυτού. Uai de tais engastri echusais, kai tais teladzusais en ekeinais tais gemerais. Προσεύχεστε de gina me genetai himonos. Eisontai gar gai gemerai ekeinai tlypsis, goja u gegunen tojaute eparches, ptisos gen ektisen kuteos eos tu nun, kai ume genetai. Kai eime ekolobosen kyrios tas gemeras, uk an esote pasasarks, Аладиатус, эклектус, гус, экселексито, эколобосентас гемерас.
Спасибо. Когда вы увидите, что мерзость опустошающая, это, конечно же, не буквальный перевод греческого мерзость запустения, ремусис, но я здесь постарался сохранить некоторую преемственность с тем, как мы эту самую мерзость переводили в Данииле с еврейского. Шикут с Машамаем. Мерзость опустошающая, стать там, где не должно ей быть, пусть тот, кто читает это место, поймет. Тогда живущие в Иудее должны бежать в горы. Кто будет на крыше, пусть не спускается и не входит в дом за вещами. Кто будет в поле, пусть не возвращается в дом за плащом. Плохо придется тогда беременным и кормящим грудью. Молитесь, чтобы все это не случилось зимой. Придет в те дни такая беда, какой не было от начала мира, сотворенного Богом. Да ныне не было, и впредь уже не будет. Если бы Господь не положил тем дням скорый конец, никто не уцелел бы. Но ради избранников, ради тех, кого Он избрал, Господь сделает эти дни недолгими. И, конечно же, в последнем стихе у нас стоит вопрос о том, что значит экологосом. Вроде бы наиболее естественное понимание здесь этого греческого выражения эколобусом тазгемерес, что вот он определил, что число этих дней должно быть не слишком долгим, а то совсем не останется никого из избранников. Среди православных неофитов не встречалось, возможно, как-то восходит и к каким-то более авторитетным трудам мнения о том, что здесь то, что дни сокращаются, связано с тем, что не с тем, что сокращается их число, а с тем, что дни как таковые становятся меньше, меньше, меньше. Вот поэтому там на протяжении светового дня меньше безобразий и прочих плохих вещей происходит. Вот. Мне встречались люди, которые так вот и говорили, видно. В наши дни, в наше время дни сокращаются, это же заметно, меньше успеваешь делать. Вот. Но я думаю, что это явно не то понимание, которое имел в виду Марк. Чтобы Господь не сделал эти дни недолгими. Чтобы для единообразия сделал эти дни недолгими.
Вы хотите сохранить эту двусмысленность, чтобы
Нет, я просто
говорите?
я хочу сделать немножко ближе к греческому тексту. Вот. Конечно, интересно было бы понять, в какой момент в истории православной экзегезы такая экзегеза появилась. Но это же не имеет никакого отношения к билистике, это имеет отношение к этнографии. Содержательный вопрос.
Наверное, зимой где-нибудь ближе к полярному кругу.
Да. На самом деле нет, Потому что вот я могу, как человек, который относительно недавно переехал из более южных широт в более северные широты, сказать, что ровно наоборот. В южных широтах дни короче, чем в северных широтах. Они не такие теплые, но зато они позже начинаются и раньше кончаются. Это астрономический факт. Вот. Okay, the question is whether this passage can also be understood as an indication of the time when Mark, or at least his source, was written. Господь сделает эти дни недолгими. Господь сделал эти дни недолгими. С одной стороны, у нас это же все предсказание о будущем. Но с другой стороны, внутри этого предсказания, которое может пониматься как ватициниум экс авенту, у нас
I
здесь
guess, yeah. The way most people would take the aorist in verse 20, a kolobosin, as something like the Hebrew prophetic perfect, right? It's using past tense to talk about something future. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a description of the things that are supposed to happen immediately before the end of the world and before the cosmos disintegrating. So I don't think Mark thinks he lives in the time when the cosmos is disintegrating. So I think most people would say that this is a description, it's a prophecy that is really a description of where Mark thinks he's standing in the time of great tribulation, verse 19. The greatest tribulation and suffering there will ever be, and that will immediately, because God will shorten the days, that will immediately lead to the return of Jesus. So I guess, yeah, I don't see how one could take the okolobosin in verse 20 as a reference to something that Mark thinks has already happened.
Можно сомнение небольшое?
можно.
Вот у меня как раз к тому же месту, к 20 стиху, исключительно к русскому. Вот если бы Господь не сделал эти дни недолгими, никто не уцелел бы. И вот можно ли по-русски это понять как относящееся к будущему?
По-русски можно.
А вот у меня в этом смысле сомнения.
Конечно. Потому что по-русски «л»-формы в сочетании с частичкой «бы», они, несмотря на свое внешнее сходство с прошедшим временем, обозначают слагательное наклонение. Если бы завтра катастрофа закончилась, мы возрадовались бы.
Ну да, мне кажется, это особенность казус и реалис. Во всех языках он может быть только с формами прошедшего времени. И, собственно, по-английски то же самое, да. Тоже он может относиться к будущему, но формы должны
Нет,
быть.
тогда я этому очень рада, потому что это вечное проклятие было при переводе дигест.
Иначе
Все, если
устроено.
так, то хорошо.
Вот. Но действительно проблема у нас с этим «эйме эколобусом». У нас проблем нет, потому что есть у нас по-гречески казус и реалис, мы переводим русским казусом и реалисом, и проблем нет. А вот дальше у нас эколобусом стоит в индикативе. Господь сделал эти дни недолгими.
I mean, verse 20 and verse 19 must be talking about the same time. And yet, verse 19 is using the future, esontai, whereas verse 20 is using the aorist, okolobosin.
Yes, essence.
Yeah, but aren't they both talking about,
Yeah, but
they're both talking about this time of thlipsis.
yeah, that's what I said just before in Russian, that in verse 20 we have casus realis, and I said that in all our languages, realis can be only with forms with past tense, and in English is the same. You should have past perfect had Lord, unless the Lord had shortened, no one would have been saved, right?
Your reason goes well with the first part of verse 20, but we're speaking about the last case.
Yeah, but my question is about English language. Joel, can this casus realis in English refer to the future in English? If I say
No, well, no, I think but I mean, Greek has a present unreal, right? But that would use the that wouldn't use the aorist.
no, I think in Greek unreal period always
Either aorist or imperfect.
imperfect. Yeah.
So the imperfect is used for the present contrary to fact, and the aorist is used for the past contrary to fact. So Mark could have used the present contrary to fact, but here he uses the aorist. That creates the problem. I mean, in English, I mean, you could say, if God doesn't shorten the days, no human being will be saved. So that would be the present unreal.
Okay.
But at least the most translations here have here English translations express irrealis with some past forms. For example, New Revised Standard, if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would be saved.
Right. Yeah, because Mark uses the aorist rather than, so yeah.
But what can we do? What should we do with the last Ecolobosan?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess you can stretch it to say this isn't talking about God cutting the days short, but it's about him deciding to cut them short. Put it in the mind of God. Yeah. Mikhail doesn't like that. I saw him raise his eyebrows.
But I like this.
But I know you like it. Yeah. It's a problem. Yeah. Well, and yeah, this is this the only time in the passage where like God, kurios is invoked, and like presumably this is God's timeline that is unfolding, but this is the only time in the passage in which, and explicitly, the author talks about the intention of God, or something that God does directly. God decides to shorten the days because otherwise all of humanity will be wiped out. And that's, and we see that in other apocalypses, right? That the last times will be a time of evil and of suffering greater than ever. It's the climax of the suffering of history. And if God didn't intervene, then humanity wouldn't survive. But I don't think that it doesn't make sense to me that the author, again, thinks that God has already intervened in the way that verse 20 describes, and therefore I would go for some sort of, speculative but extended meaning of a kolobosin that ascribed it to like the mind of God rather than something that God has already actually done in the author's mind. So I guess that's why I side with Maria and against Michael.
At least this solution seems to be more convincing than the idea of prophetic perfect, because though we have prophetic perfect in Hebrew, and as a calque from the Hebrew, we have prophetic perfect sometimes in the Septuagint. I don't remember many other cases of prophetic perfect with prophetic aorist in the New Testament.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question.
There are some syntactic or semantic patterns that the Septuagint inherited from the Old Testament and passed it over to the New Testament writers, but it seems that
how about the Magnificat? He has showed strength with his arm. He has cast down the mighty. Those are prophetic perfects. Do they refer to things that have already happened, or is that what is going to happen through Christ in Luke chapter 1?
I understood this as a reference to the event for the Nativity.
Okay. But I guess I think that, for Luke, Jesus is the one through whom the mighty will be thrown down and the poor will be fed. And I'm not sure that you can limit what's being. I think in a way the Magnificat is a preview of what the author thinks is going to happen, not only has happened, but is going to happen through Jesus. And of course it's echoing Hannah's song in the Old Testament.
Yes, it's almost a quotation of the Septuagint in the New Testament.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that is a prophetic. I think it's easily read as a as a reference not only to what's being described in Luke 1, but also what's described in the rest of the gospel and even in Acts.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe we can talk about it more next time.
No, next time.
if
Yes,
God shortens the
it seems that today we have approached the end of our meeting.
end. Yes, the signs of the end are all around us.
Yes, the signs of the end. Thank you very much for those who were with us. I saw some, я видел некоторые сообщения в чате. Здесь преследуют непрослеживаемость идеи предательства, говорит отец Ириней, что безменные предатели как бы стоят в тени в Торе отцу Иринею, говорит Ира Пекунова. Можно попробовать все пассивы переводить как отдан, вот там, где имеется в виду божественный пассив, а активные как предадут предал. Мне кажется, что вот эти идеи переводческие отца Иринея и Ирины могут нам показаться осмысленными и пригодиться. Спасибо, отец Ильей. Спасибо, Ира. Вот. Хорошо. Тогда мы встречаемся next Thursday.
До
Спасибо.
свидания, до скорого.
До скорого.
До свидания, goodbye.
Спасибо.